Here's another little graphic, a little GIF to start us off here. Not a GIF, a meme to start us off here. I'm going to try that again. Hold on. Here's another little funny meme to start off this section, just talking about. So I'm going to give you a second to look at it, and then I'm going to talk about it for a second. I don't know about you, but sometimes when people get very passionate about something that they love, even if it's something that we don't necessarily know much about, they can go off for a long period of time. And so that active listening comes in to so much use. I'm sure a lot of people will use that with me when I will talk about my favorite things for 20 minutes. I can talk anytime that you want about my favorite things, but sometimes the active listening is going to really help us in this moment. So as we look and continue on, here is just another little video that we're going to watch.
Listening is one of the most important aspects of effective communication. In today's high-tech, high-speed world, we seem to devote less and less time to really listening to one another. Genuine listening is a skill, and it's a really powerful tool you can use in the workplace. By improving your listening skills, you can make a speaker feel heard and understood. This helps build stronger, deeper connections between you and your colleagues. A good listener creates a workplace environment where everyone feels safe to express ideas, opinions, and feelings. They can creatively solve problems in partnership, and they can save time, avoiding conflict and misunderstandings. They can also help relieve negative emotions. When a person feels that he or she has been truly heard, it can help calm them and allow for understanding or problem solving to begin. There are 4 key skills which you can learn to unlock the power of effective listening. Number 1, focus fully on the speaker. You need to really concentrate on the person speaking and pay special attention to their body language and other non-verbal cues. If you start to daydream, doodle, or check social media, then you're certain to miss non-verbal cues in the conversation. Okay, some speakers can be really boring, so if you're finding it hard to concentrate, try repeating their words over in your head. It will reinforce their message and help you stay focused. Number 2, avoid interrupting. It's very common for people to interrupt one another when communicating. Have you ever been speaking with a colleague or manager and it seems no matter what you do, you keep getting interrupted? You begin a sentence, then suddenly someone jumps in to complete it. It's very frustrating, isn't it? You feel like you're not being heard. If it happens often enough, you might even stop contributing to the conversation altogether. Furthermore, you decide the person interrupting you is rude and your relationship is damaged forever. So, why do people do it? Well, on average, humans speak at a rate of 125 to 150 words per minute. But the human brain can comprehend and listen at the rate of 600 words per minute. This means that our minds are underutilized when listening to others. We therefore struggle to keep our minds on topic. You might hear 1 or 2 phrases of the conversation and jump ahead to a solution or share a previous experience. Our boredom can inadvertently create a separate conversation. There are simple tricks you can practice to interrupt your interrupting behavior. For example, try to close your mouth whilst listening. People often open their mouths to signal to the other person that they are ready to talk. When in a conversation, imagine a drop of glue on your lip. Focusing on keeping your mouth closed will stop you interrupting someone. Another tip is to make a note during the conversation. We now know that our brains operate much faster than others can speak, so it's natural that we have ideas we don't want to lose, and this can lead you to interrupt someone. To combat this urge and avoid losing the idea, write it down. Continue to listen, but make a note of the points you want to make when it's your turn to talk. Finally, try to change your focus. Think about listening more than talking. Simply change your goal for the conversation to listen more than you speak. This change in focus can have a drastic impact on your success in curbing your interruption habit. Chances are one of the points we just covered speaks to you directly. Focus on that method and use it in your very next conversation. Number 3, avoid seeming judgmental. In order to communicate effectively with someone, you don't have to like them or agree with their ideas, values, or opinions. However, you do need to set aside your judgment and withhold blame and criticism in order to fully understand a person. The most difficult communication, when successfully executed, can lead to the most unlikely and profound connection with someone. Number 4, show your interest. You need to look interested in what the other person is saying. Try to nod occasionally, smile at the person talking, and make sure your posture is open and inviting. Encourage the speaker to continue with small verbal comments like yes, right, and really. You can even show you are listening with non-words such as or uh-huh. If your goal is to fully understand and connect with the other person, then listening effectively will often come naturally. If it doesn't, you can remember the 4 key skills you've just learned. The more you practice them, the more satisfying and rewarding your interactions with others will become.
I think this video brings up some really good points. And again, this is just something else giving you more strategies and more activities and tools that you can use and to help. And I think this shows some good ways in order to use that active listening throughout our day and throughout our life. I know that it said in the video that there's something that you might have gained from it specifically for yourself that really hit home with you. So just think about that. Think about something that you gathered from that. I know for me, I will do that a lot. Well, sometimes I will focus on what I want to say next in a conversation and less on listening to what this person needs to say. And so sometimes I'll catch myself in that where I'll be in my mind thinking, what's the next thing I'm going to say? And then I'll tell myself, wait a minute, you're supposed to be listening. And I'll try to get back to that moment of listening again. I also really liked him pointing out the mouth thing, that when we're getting ready to talk, we instinctively open our mouth to do that. I didn't even think about that until he mentioned it, but I do that. I do that a lot, and sometimes to me it makes it less awkward because I'm trying to show that I'm ready to talk, but really it's probably just making that person feel like they need to move faster in their conversation. So just something to think about. So think about to yourself some of those things that you might have hit home with that as we continue on. So now these are just another few tips to talk about when looking at active listening. This is a graphic that I'm going to go through when talking. And this graphic, again, is just something that we have that we can give to you. This is more for you than it is for your students because it is a lot. But if you like it and want to use it, you can. You could also kind of break it up in what you get. But obviously, we've talked about what active listening is and how we're concentrating on what's being said and not thinking about what you're going to say next, as I just talked about. And, we know what those are. And when we're talking about the benefits, we've talked about that. But making sure that you understand, like that you remember that this really is about building that better teacher-student relationship. We want to make sure that we can use this all the time and to help our students feel heard, not just when it's in a crisis situation. And it helps reduce the tension and the hostility in the classroom. We want the students to make them feel like they're heard, and oftentimes when they do feel heard, they'll feel more willing to do what you're asking them to do. It's to improve that communication and trust among the students and teachers, and also provide that classroom and atmosphere in a safe environment. So we're just going to be talking about some of the tips that we have that we might be able to use. So for the first one's that paraphrasing, and that's exactly what we've already said. Saying things back like what I hear you're saying, or if I understand you right. This is where it's not exactly saying exactly the same words that they said back to you, but this might be paraphrasing it into your own words. There's times that you can use that, and there's also times that you're going to want to say almost exactly verbatim what they say to you, depending on the situation. Asking those questions. I love when I'm in the middle of talking and somebody asks me questions because it feels like they're fully engaged in what I'm saying. And it also gives me permission as the speaker to continue to talk. Because sometimes, as I've mentioned before, multiple times during this, is that I talk a lot. And so if I'm in the middle of talking, there are times where I'm saying, oh, I need to stop talking. I shouldn't keep talking. But if somebody stops and specifically asks a question, I feel like I can continue to elaborate and not feel bad about it. That body language we've talked about is huge, showing them that you are interested by nodding, facing them, maintaining an open and relaxed body posture. I know it's hard, but sometimes, depending on how the situation is, if you're standing, especially if you're in an elementary building, all the kids are smaller than you, most likely. And so just making sure that you're not having a persona that seems as if you're being domineering. So you want to make sure that you're on a same level as the kids if you can. Show empathy. If the student voices there's negative feelings, try to validate them rather than question them. And this is important. They just want to be heard and they want to feel like they are being understood. And this is just a way of putting yourself in their shoes, and you can say things like, I can understand how this situation could cause frustration. It's just allowing them to understand that they're not alone. Avoid judgment. Your goal is to understand your student's perspective. You don't want to seem like you're judging. You don't want them to think that your goal is to make them feel bad, because you're not. Your goal is to understand their perspective, even if it might be wrong. And you don't want to interrupt with your own opinions while the student is speaking, because we all have them. And you might know that what they did wasn't okay, but at that moment, you're just trying to talk to them and listen to their side of it. When we get emotionally involved, angry or upset, is when things start going south. And so we don't want to do that. We don't want to be in that situation, especially since we're a role model. And really, our students are looking up to us and they're looking at us on how they act. We want to avoid giving advice too quickly. We want them to finish speaking before we attempt to get advice. At this time, it's not about giving advice. You want to make sure that you fully understand them first. If you move too quickly, it can really be counterproductive. And you might find that you need to give them some advice. They might be looking for that. That might be what they really want. But you want to make sure that there's a time and place for it, and it feels natural, and it feels like something that they need in that moment. Otherwise, they're not going to follow your advice. The next thing is to evaluate the conversation. Take a moment to evaluate after the student said everything, how you think the conversation has gone. Because we've all been there before where we say things or we done things that maybe wasn't really the best. We've had a bad day. Things were really rough. We want to make sure that we evaluate ourselves and how that went. I know I've told this story before, but I think it's an important one to think about. I had a student who, for some reason, was really giving me some attitude in that day, and I was walking down the hallway dealing with something else in my own mind, and I walked past him and he said something to me, and I just said, go back into class, and he gave me attitude, and I remember turning and just giving him attitude back and kept walking. And I evaluated myself and I said, why, that wasn't cool that I did that. I was having a bad day and I took it out on him. Even though he was giving me attitude, it could have been handled differently. And thankfully that student is a pretty good student and went right back to class, as in, behavior-wise, he can at times spike up, but he really, at that moment, even though he was frustrated, went back to class. Later on in the day, since I evaluated myself, I went and I talked to him again, and I apologized, and he apologized to me before I even said anything, which he didn't need to, but it just allowed me to have that conversation with him afterwards, and it didn't feel like it was over. So there are times that mistakes happen, but don't think that you can't go and talk to the student again, or you can't have those conversations, because you can. It can make a huge difference. And then the last thing is just that listening might just be enough. Sometimes our students just want to be listened to, and as teachers, we tend to want to fix it. We want to fix our students' problem for them. We want to help them as fast as possible, especially since we don't want them to be frustrated, and we want our day to go by as smooth as possible. But, if our minds are busy coming up with solutions for them, we're really not listening to them. So the more that we can listen to them, sometimes that's really going to be enough to accomplish what we need done. So what you're going to do now is you're going to take 10 minutes, 5 minutes per section, to answer the following 2 true and false questions that we have. What's going to happen is a timer is going to come up on the next page. There's no music to it, and you're going to just answer the true false questions as best as you can. You don't have to write them down. You can just read it and answer it in your mind, and then we'll go over the answers at the end. So again, you're just going to go ahead and take a look at that, and there's going to be timers for both pages. So you can go ahead and do that now. All right, so now we are going to move on to the next section. There's just a few more not multiple choice, true false questions. Same thing. Just look at them, read them over, see if you can get them all, and then we'll talk about them afterwards. So again, you'll get 5 minutes for these ones, and then we'll talk about it right afterwards. So go ahead and take the 5 minutes, and then when we come back, we are going to answer all the questions. Okay, sorry about that. Let me get that back up. Okay, so now we are going to answer the true or false questions. Obviously with a very good meme. So, talking about the first one, hearing and listening are essentially the same thing. That is false. Obviously, sometimes we hear something and we aren't really listening, or we aren't really paying attention. So, that's why there's a difference. When we're really listening, we are really understanding what's happening. The next one is people need effective listening skills people need effective listening skills in almost all occupations. That's true. You know, anything that you're doing, you want to be able to listen and communicate with your coworkers and your staff and your students, depending on whatever you're doing. It's important for anybody. The next one, research indicates that even when we listen carefully, we understand and retain only about half of what we hear, which is true. That goes back to what we talked about before, that you can only really hear a certain amount of words that are being said. Most of it is our facial expressions, and most of it is our tone of voice. People spend more time listening than in any other communicative activity, and that one is also true. You know, that's what we're doing all day long. We're listening to words, we're listening to music, we're listening to people. That is things that we're doing all day long. You can improve your own speeches by listening carefully to the speeches of other people. This one is also true. This is something that I think is super helpful. By listening to other people, you can tend to pick out some of the things that you do. I know that one of the things that I use as a filler is the word and I'll use that a lot. And now, because of listening to other people use it, I'm more in tune in myself and when I do it, and I try my best not to use it because I'm thinking about that based on what I've heard other people say. Next, we've got active listening is closely tied to critical thinking. And this one is false. Active listening, I'm sorry, did I say active listening? I meant to say appreciative listening is closely tied to critical thinking, and that's what is false. When we are listening, we can be appreciative and we could be listening to somebody, and it's not like we're delving deep in what they're saying, what I've talked about before. We're listening to what they're saying, but we're not necessarily making a huge thought process when it comes to it. We can listen and listen appropriately. The next one is listening is a passive process while critical thinking is an active process. And that is false. When we listen, we are being active in what we're doing, obviously it being titled active listening. It's just a way of doing it in the sense that it almost looks like we're not being active when we're being passive, but at the same time we're doing something. It just might not be necessarily that you're fully comprehending absolutely everything that they're talking about, because sometimes we don't, but it's listening enough and allowing that active listening skills to allow that person to make them feel like they're being heard, and that in itself is an active role. The next one is listening to provide emotional support for someone is called empathetic listening. And this one is true. The next one that we have was on the next page, and this is when you listen to someone gives a sales presentation, you need to decide whether you will buy the item and you need to decide whether or not you'll buy the item. You're engaging in comprehensive listening. And that one is false. At that moment when you're trying to decide on whether or not you want to buy the item, you're not necessarily engaging in that comprehensive listening, because at that moment it's more about the singular item. The next one that we've got is listening to evaluate a message for purposes of accepting or rejecting is known as critical listening. And this is true. The next one that we have is critical listening involves listening to evaluate a message for purposes of accepting it or rejecting it, which is also true. And then the final true or false question is concentrating on details and is an excellent way to become a better listener. And that is false. That's something that we talked about in the beginning of this, and in some of the videos, that if you concentrate on those little key details, it can make it feel like you're being a better listener, but at the same time, you might not be picking up on everything that they're saying. So it's just about trying to listen as much as possible. And I know that that's something that can be really difficult to do, but as you practice and get better at it, it can become easier. Here's just another meme to end it all, but when you're using that active listening technique and it actually works, it's one of my favorite things, that when you respond back to a kid and you say exactly what they say, but they thrive off of it and continue their conversation, I have that Willy Wonka face. So in conclusion, finally, at the end of this long video, what is it that we want to do? And what is it that we need to do? And in our moment, it's making kids feel heard. And I think that that's the most important thing that we need to take from this. I really like this meme. Is your story over yet? Have past kidney stones less painful than this? I've talked a lot. You've heard me listening a lot. You guys were listening a lot by listening to me talk. But I think that it's important to just remember that active listening, it really doesn't take a lot of time. You can use active listening as fast as you are with regular listening. It's just paying attention, and it's actually listening to what the kids have to say and giving them your full attention for that little bit of time. So just remember, when you're doing this, you want to use your nonverbal techniques, those silence and nods and facial expressions and eye contact. We also want to make sure that we're using our encouraging and eliciting techniques, your tone of voice, saying things like "go on" or "I'd like to hear more," your open and closed questions. Then we want to make sure that we're using those reflective responses. Reflect back to them everything that they're telling you. And that summarization, repeating back their whole story, making sure that you really heard what happened. And when you do this, again, I really think that it's going to be effective in helping your students actually feel heard. And, just continue to use this as much as you can. As you continue watching other videos, we're going to continue to talk about different ways that you can utilize our techniques throughout TCIS, but this is definitely one that feels the most effective in our everyday situations, not just at school and not just with kids with crisis. So this is going to be the end of this video, and then there will be a couple others posted as well for you to watch. Thank you, and I hope you guys all have a good day.